Is such an honor for me. It was almost 25 years ago. The world met you with Tipping Point. What made you decide to go back now? I don't want to say what was the tipping point, but what made you say, yep, it's time?
Well, it was originally I was just going to do a kind of revised silver anniversary edition of The Tipping Point. And so I read it for the first time in 25 years. I hadn't looked at it in this entire time.
How did you feel reading it?
It was like looking at your high school yearbook. It was that experience. It was like, wow. First of all, that was a long time ago. So it was a little bit, I realized I didn't want to revise it, or I couldn't revise it, and too much had happened, and I was arguing with myself about what I wrote 25 years ago. So I just decided, I'm just going to write a whole new one. I had an existing book project, which I just set aside, and I just went and wrote the book from scratch.
And the mission?
The mission was, I realized looking back at the first book was very hopeful, and it was all about, it was written when I was in my mid-30s, in the late 90s, when the world just seemed like it was getting better and better, and this was a book about how to make it even better. And then now I feel like I'm a little more concerned about the ways in which people have used epidemics for, nefarious purposes.
You write about this fear of bad actors taking over, right? The laws of the very few controlling everything. Explain that, because a lot of people have those fears right now.
Yeah, I mean, the book begins and ends, it's sort of framed by the opioid crisis and about, I tell a kind of new story about a new way of making sense of what happened, focusing on Purdue Pharma, the manufacturer of OxyContin. And I have a little bit at the beginning, and then the last chapter of the book uses all the lessons. And basically it's about how the reason they were able to turn OxyContin into something that, this extraordinary crisis that's enveloped us, is they really took the lessons of epidemic change to heart. They didn't try and reach every doctor in the country. That's not how epidemics work. Epidemics work, it's always a very small number of people who are at the center of an epidemic. It was true of COVID, it was true of, you name the, and they were able to identify a tiny, tiny handful of doctors who were incredibly susceptible to their marketing message, who were, who loved nothing more than being wined and dined by a sales rep, who saw no problem with writing prescriptions by the thousands for OxyContin. And they just focused on those people. That was the strategy. Find the 1% who matter and visit them hundreds of times and convince them to write mountains of prescriptions. That's epidemic thinking.
But that's just one example. When you think about bad actors taking over, is that why you're voicing who you're going to support in this presidential election? You've said you're going to support Kamala Harris. So could we tie those two things together?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I mean, I'm half Jamaican. She's half Jamaican. She grew up in Canada. I grew up in Canada. Every Jamaican in my life is like, I talk to my mom, it's like Kamala, 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 Kamala. My dad taught his dad.
Her dad.
Oh, her dad.
Yes.
My father taught her dad at the University of West Indies in 1960. I have so many kind of points of connection. I could not but be a supporter. But also, yes, I would be a supporter even if I wasn't half Jamaican.
You do a lot of provocative things in the book. Among many provocative arguments you make, you criticize not just higher education, but the Ivy League.
Oh, my God.
You're not alone in doing so, though. You're a dad. I'm going to call you in 15 years and ask you if you really don't want your daughters to go to Princeton. But we have a few more years. Explain to us why you feel this way.
Well, I was trying to make sense of this strange fact that Harvard University has more varsity sports than any other university in the country.
Well, they have more money.
Well, it's not about money. It's not about money. And they're also obsessed with sports in this kind of really bizarre way that, there are three, there's a back, the front door to go to Harvard's really difficult to get. It's the most competitive school in the world, but there's a back door. There's a back door if you're rich. There's a back door if you're a legacy, if your parents went there. There's a back door if you're a faculty kid, and there's a back door if you're an athlete. No
more affirmative action. But if you're a superstar lacrosse player,
oh my God,
come on in.
They will lower their standards. They will, and they will recruit you from the other side of the world. Correct. And I was trying to figure out, why do they care so much about filling their campus with athletes? To the point where they'll take their own high standards and take them down to the floor and welcome in these kids who row or fence or do all these, play rugby is the chapter, is the example I use. And I think it's a kind of a strategy to maintain the group proportions of Harvard. In other words, they like kids who play rich people sports because it's a way of maintaining a kind of the culture of white American privilege at Harvard. I think it's as simple as that. And I sort of walk through the argument about why that's the case, because I don't think there's any other reason why they should be so obsessed with sports. I mean, we think of, University of Alabama or Clemson as being sports obsessed.
Yeah,
no, Harvard is way
but you
more
get why Alabama is. You understand the hundreds of millions of dollars that Alabama football brings in, but Harvard rowing, not so much.
No, that's not the game they're playing. I think so. I have that's tied to an idea I play a lot with in the book about what's called the magic third, which is that there are organizations, institutions have tipping points. When outsiders reach the magic third, they change the nature of the organization. And so what I believe Harvard is doing is trying to keep the non-privileged elements of the school below the magic third. And they do that by stuffing themselves with rich athletes.